Elena Moore walked away from a safe job without telling anyone why, and 31 days later, she was found dead in a house no one knew she lived in. Victor Hale promised her a future that looked perfect on a screen, but investigators still can't prove he was ever real. Maya Collins sensed something was wrong, yet every message from Elena sounded calm, controlled, and dangerously distant. Detective Ryan Foster followed the money, only to watch every digital trail vanish the moment he got close. No wounds, no poison, no intruder, just silence where answers should be. This is not just a story about a love scam. It's about how trust became a trap. Elena Moore had never been the kind of person who surprised anyone. Her life followed a quiet rhythm built on routine and responsibility. She woke up before sunrise, wore neatly pressed uniforms, and spent long hours handling customer complaints at the airline office where she worked for nearly 6 years. Her co-workers trusted her. Her supervisors relied on her. Nothing about Elena suggested she would suddenly disappear from the life everyone knew. That is why the resignation shocked everyone. It happened on an ordinary weekday. Elena walked into the office, cleared her desk, and submitted a short resignation email effective immediately. There was no farewell lunch, no emotional goodbye, no explanation beyond a single sentence that mentioned a confidential opportunity she could not discuss. By evening, her work email was deactivated, her access badge returned, and her name quietly removed from the schedule. To those around her, it felt unreal. Elena had always talked about job security and long-term plans. She once rejected a promotion because it required relocation. Yet now, she walked away from a stable career without hesitation. In the days that followed, her behavior became even more unsettling. Elena listed her apartment for early termination and paid the penalty without complaint. She sold her car within 48 hours, accepting the first offer without negotiation. Furniture, clothes, personal items, almost everything was either sold or donated. Only a single suitcase remained. Neighbors noticed lights on late at night and curtains always drawn. Her phone usage increased dramatically. She spent hours staring at the screen, typing, deleting, and retyping messages. When she did respond to friends, the replies were short and strangely distant. There were no emojis, no familiar warmth, no explanations. Just brief confirmations that she was fine and busy. Maya Collins, her closest friend, sensed something was wrong. Elena had always shared her plans, even the smallest ones. Now she avoided video calls and ignored repeated check-ins. When Maya passed by her apartment a week later, the place was already empty. Elena vanished without announcing where she was going. Bank records later revealed that large deposits began appearing shortly after her resignation. The amounts were shocking, more than Elena had earned in months, yet she spent almost none of it on herself. The money moved quickly in and out of her account, transferred late at night to unfamiliar platforms. It was as if the funds were never meant to stay with her. Meanwhile, Elena's digital footprint slowly erased itself. Her social media accounts were deleted. Old photos disappeared. Even professional profiles went offline. Friends who searched her name found nothing new, as if she had chosen to remove herself from the world. 3 weeks after quitting her job, Elena rented a small suburban house under a short-term lease. The location was quiet, far from her old neighborhood, with no known connection to her past. She told no one about it. Delivery drivers dropped packages that were never opened outside. Curtains remained closed all day. Inside the house, there were no decorations, no signs of comfort. Just a laptop, a phone charger, and a suitcase placed near the door. The silence around Elena grew heavier with each passing day. Then, exactly 31 days after she walked out of her job, police received a call about an unresponsive woman in the rented house. There were no sounds of alarm, no neighbors reporting disturbance, no emergency calls from Elena herself. Officers found her alone. There were no visible injuries, no sign of forced entry, no mess, no struggle. The scene looked frozen in time, as if Elena had simply stopped moving. News of her death spread quickly among former co-workers and friends. Shock turned into confusion. Confusion turned into fear. Everyone asked the same question, and no one had an answer. What kind of job makes someone erase their life? What kind of contract demands total silence? And how did a careful, grounded woman end up dead in a house no one knew she lived in? As investigators began digging into her final month, one unsettling truth became clear. Elena's story was not about a sudden decision. It was about a slow pull into something hidden, something carefully designed to look like opportunity while quietly closing every exit. Stay with us, because what happens next changes everything you think you know about her death. When investigators began searching for the contract Elena Moore had mentioned before quitting her job, they expected to find at least a paper trail. A company name, a legal document, or a registered employer. Instead, they found nothing. No corporate records. No tax filings. No business licenses. The contract that had changed Elena's life simply did not exist in any official system. Her laptop became the first major clue. It was clean, almost too clean. Browsing history had been wiped repeatedly. File folders were empty except for one encrypted application that required a key no one could access. The app had been installed just days before Elena resigned, and it had been used daily until 2 days before her death. Emails linked to the so-called job were sent from addresses that no longer existed. Each one had been deleted shortly after being opened. The writing style was professional but impersonal, filled with warnings about confidentiality and legal consequences for disclosure. There were no signatures, no logos, no identifiable location. Elena's bank records told a darker story. Large sums of money appeared in her account every few days, sometimes late at night, sometimes early in the morning. The payments were labeled as consulting fees, but they came from different sources each time. Within hours, the money was transferred out to digital wallets and foreign exchanges. Elena never withdrew cash. She never used the money for shopping, travel, or personal expenses. It was as if her account was being used as a temporary doorway. Financial analyst Liam Brooks traced several transactions to online investment platforms that looked legitimate on the surface. They had polished websites, customer support pages, and fake reviews. But behind the design was nothing real. No registered ownership. No headquarters. Just empty digital shells. Elena had also opened multiple new accounts using her real identity, but operated through masked networks. Someone had guided her step by step, teaching her how to move money without leaving obvious tracks. For someone with no background in finance, her actions were unusually precise. Police began to suspect Elena was not fully aware of what she had been pulled into. Her phone data revealed a strict routine. Messages sent and received at fixed times. Notifications disabled. Location services turned off. Even her battery usage suggested long hours spent waiting, watching, and responding on command. Whoever controlled the system expected obedience. Then investigators found something more troubling. Elena had signed several digital agreements that transferred responsibility away from the sender and onto her. The language was subtle but dangerous. It suggested that she understood the risks, accepted legal consequences, and agreed not to seek help from authorities under any circumstances. None of the documents were legally binding, but they were convincing enough to scare someone unfamiliar with law. Friends later said Elena had always been afraid of legal trouble. She avoided confrontation and hated the idea of being in trouble with authorities. That fear may have been used against her. As the investigation continued, the email servers connected to the case suddenly went offline. Wallet addresses went inactive. The investment platforms vanished overnight. It was a digital disappearance timed too perfectly to be coincidence. It became clear that whoever built the scheme knew how to erase evidence quickly. Despite weeks of effort, police could not identify a single real person behind the operation. Every lead ended at a dead server or a foreign jurisdiction. The trail was designed to collapse the moment attention arrived. What disturbed investigators most was how carefully Elena had been isolated. She had been instructed to cut contact, maintain secrecy, and trust only the system providing her income. The money created dependence. The secrecy created fear. Together, they formed a trap. By the time Elena may have realized something was wrong, she had already crossed invisible lines. Her final transactions showed hesitation. Transfers delayed. Small amounts left untouched. A pattern that suggested doubt. Someone who was no longer following instructions perfectly. And in schemes like this, hesitation is dangerous. The contract that promised freedom had slowly erased her safety. The opportunity that looked like a solution had become a cage with no visible bars. As investigators closed in on the truth, one question grew louder than all the rest. If the contract was fake, the money illegal, and the people behind it invisible, then what really happened in Elena's final days? The answer would be far more disturbing than anyone expected. As investigators dug deeper into Elena Moore's digital life, a single name began to appear again and again: Victor Hale. At first, the name seemed ordinary, almost forgettable. It appeared in email headers, encrypted app usernames, and file metadata. Nothing about it stood out, and that was exactly the point. Elena had been communicating with Victor daily. The frequency increased after she quit her job, sometimes stretching late into the night. The messages were not casual. They followed a strict pattern focused on tasks, timing, and reassurance. Every instruction was paired with calm explanations that framed risk as opportunity and secrecy as protection. Victor presented himself as a successful online investor who specialized in moving funds for private clients. His online presence was carefully curated. Photos showed luxury apartments, airport lounges, and foreign city skylines. Everything suggested wealth, control, and experience. For someone like Elena, who craved stability but felt undervalued at her job, the image was powerful. Digital forensics soon revealed the truth. The photos were not real. They were generated by artificial intelligence, stitched together from fragments of other images. The locations were mismatched. The reflections didn't align. The shadows fell in impossible directions. Victor Hale did not exist in the physical world. His voice messages, once examined closely, were even more disturbing. Audio experts confirmed they were compiled from multiple sources, blended together to sound consistent. Different accents appeared under analysis. The voice had been engineered to feel trustworthy. What made the situation more complex was that Victor did not rush Elena. He spent weeks building confidence before introducing the contract. He praised her intelligence, emphasized her reliability, and gradually framed her as someone chosen, not recruited. The emotional bond came before the financial trap. Elena was not the only one. Liam Brooks uncovered connections to other accounts using the same communication style. Different names, different faces, same patterns. Women in their 20s and 30s. Stable jobs. No criminal records. All had been approached through private online spaces that promised opportunity and discretion. 3 of those women had vanished from public records after similar financial activity. One survived long enough to report massive losses but refused to go public, citing fear of legal consequences and threats she could not explain. The operation functioned like a silent network. There were no threats written in words, only implications. Missed payments resulted in sudden warnings. Delays were met with reminders of legal exposure. Everything was designed to keep participants compliant without ever showing force. Elena's involvement went deeper than investigators first assumed. She had been instructed to verify accounts, test transfers, and confirm transactions under her name. In doing so, she unknowingly became part of the system's protection layer. If authorities traced the money, it would lead to her feist. Her search history revealed moments of doubt. Late-night queries about international fraud laws. Questions about digital contracts and liability. She was trying to understand the trap she was already inside. Data logs showed a sudden change in behavior during her final week. Response time slowed. Instructions were acknowledged but not immediately followed. Some tasks were skipped entirely. The system noticed. Within 48 hours, Elena received an unusual increase in automated messages emphasizing urgency and consequences. The tone shifted from reassurance to pressure. Not aggressive, but firm. Cold. Then came the silence. 2 days before her death, all communication from Victor stopped. No instructions. No reassurance. Nothing. For someone conditioned to follow a routine, the absence itself became a threat. Investigators believed this was the moment Elena realized the truth. She was no longer protected. She was replaceable. The man she trusted was never real. The affection was calculated. The future she imagined had been scripted to keep her useful. What Elena faced next remains unclear. There was no evidence of physical contact, no trace of another person entering her rented home. Whatever happened unfolded quietly, without witnesses. As police examined the timeline, one chilling realization emerged. Elena had not just been scammed. She had been slowly absorbed into a system designed to erase people the moment they stopped being useful. And once that system decided to let go, there was no way back. The autopsy results arrived quietly, but the impact was loud. Elena Moore had no visible injuries, no traces of poison, no drugs in her system, and no signs of violence. Her organs appeared normal. Her heart had simply stopped. For medical examiners, it was a kind of conclusion that explained nothing while closing every obvious door. For investigators, it was the beginning of a deeper nightmare. The rented house offered no answers. Doors and windows were locked from the inside. There were no fingerprints other than Elena's. No defensive marks. No overturned furniture. Even the dust looked untouched. It was as if time had paused the moment she collapsed. Her laptop was open on the kitchen table. The screen showed a blank document. No text. No cursor movement. Just an empty page, saved hours before her death. Forensic recovery revealed several deleted drafts written earlier that night. They were fragmented thoughts, incomplete sentences, and unfinished warnings. None of them explained what she planned to do next. Her phone held the most disturbing detail. An unsent message draft had been saved automatically. It was not addressed to anyone specific. It was short, fragmented, and heavy with fear. It suggested she had finally understood she was being used. That she had crossed a line she could not step back from. That she was afraid of what would happen if she stopped cooperating. The message ended abruptly. Digital records showed Elena had stopped all outgoing financial activity 12 hours before her death. No transfers. No logins. No confirmations. For the first time since joining the system, she had gone completely silent. Experts explained that in large-scale digital fraud networks, silence is dangerous. Participants are not meant to think. They are meant to follow instructions. When someone hesitates, it signals risk. What kind of risk, no one could prove. Stress specialists were brought in to evaluate whether psychological pressure alone could explain her sudden death. They pointed to extreme anxiety, sleep deprivation, and constant fear of legal consequences. Elena had barely slept in her final week. Her heart rate data from a fitness app showed prolonged spikes, even while she was inactive. Fear does not leave bruises. Panic does not show up on toxicology reports. But it can stop a heart. Detective Ryan Foster reviewed the timeline again and again. He searched for gaps, for moments someone could have entered unnoticed. Surveillance footage from nearby streets showed no unusual movement. No cars slowing. No unfamiliar faces. Elena was alone from the moment she arrived at the house until the moment she died. The absence of evidence became its own kind of presence. International cybercrime units were contacted, but cooperation moved slowly. Jurisdictions overlapped. Servers were hosted in countries with strict privacy laws. Requests for data were delayed, denied, or returned incomplete. Every path ended the same way. Empty servers. Deactivated accounts. Digital silence. Investigators debated possibilities quietly. Some believed Elena's death was natural, triggered by overwhelming stress and fear. Others suspected something more deliberate, something designed to leave no trace. But without evidence, suspicion remained only that. Her family struggled with the uncertainty. There was no clear cause to grieve, no explanation to hold on to. Just questions that echoed louder with time. Why erase her life so completely? Why stop communicating 2 days before she died? Why did every connected system vanish at the exact moment authorities began looking closer? As the case stalled, one thing became painfully clear. Elena had been isolated not just socially, but emotionally and psychologically. By the time she realized the danger, there was no one left to help her, and nowhere safe to turn. Her death did not look like a crime scene. That was the most unsettling part. Because the most dangerous crimes are the ones that leave nothing behind. And somewhere in the dark space between stress and silence, Elena Moore's story slipped beyond explanation, pulling investigators closer to a truth they still could not reach months past. But Elena Moore's case refused to settle into history. It remained open, suspended between unanswered questions and missing evidence. Officially, her death was listed as unexplained, a term that satisfied paperwork but brought no peace to the people left behind. Every new lead dissolved before it could take shape, leaving investigators with fragments instead of facts. The digital trail had completely collapsed. Every server once connected to Elena's accounts was gone. Domains were unregistered. Wallet addresses showed no activity. Even archived versions of the fake investment platforms had vanished, as if they were never meant to exist beyond their purpose. Cybercrime units described the operation as unusually disciplined, built to disappear the moment it was exposed. Victor Hale was never found. The name did not exist in any government database. No travel records. No financial identity. No biometric data. Analysts concluded that Victor was not a person, but a rotating identity, a digital mask used by multiple operators or perhaps an automated system designed to mimic human trust. Whoever stood behind it understood psychology better than technology. Elena's family searched for closure, but closure requires answers, and answers were the one thing the case could not provide. Her parents replayed her final weeks again and again, searching for signs they might have missed. Friends blamed themselves for not pushing harder, for respecting her silence when something felt wrong. But the system had worked exactly as designed. It isolated Elena slowly, making secrecy feel necessary and trust feel dangerous. By the time concern turned into alarm, she was already alone inside a world no one else could see. Detective Ryan Foster kept the case file on his desk long after active investigation slowed. He reviewed it during quiet hours, hoping one detail would suddenly make sense. Instead, the file became a warning. It showed how modern crime no longer needed weapons, threats, or physical presence. It only needed access, patience, and belief. Elena's story began appearing in internal cybercrime training materials. Her case was used to teach investigators how digital love scams had evolved beyond simple fraud. These were long-term operations that built emotional dependency, legal fear, and financial control without ever revealing a face. She had not been targeted because she was careless. She had been chosen because she was responsible. As awareness grew, similar victims came forward quietly. Some lost savings. Others lost years of their lives. A few disappeared entirely, their stories never documented. Elena's case became the most complete example of how devastating the consequences could be when manipulation replaced force. Still, the final moments remained unknown. There was no proof Elena was threatened. No evidence she was harmed. No trace of another person. Only the timing, the silence, and the erasure that followed her death. Investigators considered reopening the case several times, but without new evidence, there was nowhere to go. The system that pulled Elena in had already moved on, adapting, changing names, building new identities somewhere else. For the public, the story ended without satisfaction. There was no arrest, no confession, no courtroom justice. Just an empty space where answers should have been. And that is what made the story frightening. Because if something like this could happen to Elena Moore, someone careful, educated, and cautious, then it could happen to anyone. Her death did not need to be explained to be powerful. It stood as a reminder that danger no longer always knocks loudly. Sometimes it whispers, promises opportunity, and waits patiently. The secret contract never existed. The love was engineered. The system survived. And somewhere, right now, someone else may be receiving the same message Elena once read, believing it is the beginning of a better life, unaware that it might be the first step into silence. That is why this case remains open. Not on paper, but in the shadows where the next story is already being written.